right back.
What America First truly means.
Welcome to the Second American Revolution.
All right, folks, here we are back. Human Events Daily, Real America's Voice, where we have been giving you the truth about what's going on behind the scenes, day in and day out, through the entire Iran crisis. Folks, I want to tell you something. Because, you know, it's summertime, and I got to say, I love it when the 4th of July comes around. Every 4th of July, America's birthday, think about what it really means to be an American. It's not just fireworks and cookouts. It's remembering that this country was earned, and keeping it means taking responsibility for ourselves and our families. And that's why I shop at My Patriot Supply. They're an American-owned and operated company that helps me stay prepared for whatever comes. We're talking storms, blackouts, shortages, supply chain issues, obviously the threat of war, and worse. I've stocked up on emergency food kits, water filtration, solar backup power, and I sleep better knowing that my family is covered if things go sideways. And right now, My Patriot Supply is having a huge 4th of July sale. So if you've been thinking about getting prepared for emergencies, this is a great time to do it. Shop the sale now at mypatriotsupply.com/jack. If you believe in self-reliance and in personal responsibility, if you believe that America is worth defending, shop mypatriotsupply.com/jack today. That's mypatriotsupply.com/jack for all great deals on all things preparedness. Folks, as we're looking now at this decision coming out from President Trump, there's quite a lot of breaking news. As you can see, the back and forth from what's come out in the latest, and the strikes continue. We talked about this war of air attrition, and the war of air attrition continues. IDF now releasing footage of the destruction of a containment zone at the Arak nuclear reactor by a cruise missile. Huge strike by Israel on Iran that took place last night. Also hearing that Iran coming out saying, and Israel even come out saying, I should say, that Iran still has advanced missiles, and that only 65% of the missiles launched by Iran in the last 24 hours were intercepted by the country's Iron Dome system versus almost 90 the day before. So that's what an Israeli official told NBC News earlier today. What does that mean? Well, exactly what we told you yesterday here on the program when we said with General Flynn and we walked through the stockpiles of these air interceptor missiles that are being shot by Israel every night on the Iranian onslaught of the ballistics. So they come in. First of all, one key piece of this to keep in mind, those air interceptors are incredibly expensive. The cost of them, it far exceeds the cost of any one of these dumbfired missiles from Iran. And so, as General Flynn was saying, the precision targeting isn't necessarily there, but it doesn't need to be, because the goal is an attrition to attrite, to degrade Israel's ability to defend themselves. And you do that through waves upon waves of missile strikes. And in fact, people are saying, well, why is Iran only shooting 1 or 2 or 3 missiles at a time? Well, possibly the reason is because they want Israel to fire off their expensive interceptor missiles and keep this going on and on, to the point where they know they can't defeat the Iron Dome directly. So what are they doing? They're degrading Iron Dome. They're draining them of ammo, draining them of resources. This is a strategy, and we're seeing that strategy play out as Israel has gone from a 90% interception rate down to a 65% interception rate. We've got now, I want to bring on Kenny Cody from humanevents.com, the opinion editor there. Kenny, this breaking news just, I think takes everyone, of course, by surprise, that President Trump has made this decision to call for a delay 2 weeks to allow for negotiations, discussion, dialogue, perhaps even a White House meeting. A White House meeting, by the way, that Mark Levin said should not happen, that Mark Levin came in and said that President Trump should not have any more meetings. And Mark Levin decided that it was his call that President Trump should not have any more meetings, as opposed to the actual commander-in-chief that we all voted for, because I remember who we voted for. His name was Donald Trump. It wasn't anyone else or any of these other figures. President Trump making his response to that pressure by saying, I want to wait another 2 weeks. Kenny, walk us through some of the initial reaction here and the tea leaves on why the president came out this way.
I mean, I think it's pretty obvious. We've always had a foreign policy in MAGA, and President Trump has always held it, of having peace through strength and prioritizing diplomacy, prioritizing having negotiations before we actually make a militaristic strike that's going to launch our relations into being violent, using bombs, using weapons. And people are not used to that. I don't know when the panicans are going to learn that this is a process. They did the same thing with tariffs. As soon as we have anything pointed, as soon as we have any kind of negotiations, everybody panics and say, well, we're going to go into nuclear war. We're going to go into war, and we want it. We want war. But you have to give President Trump time. Foreign relations and America First foreign policy is not about just coming to the table and negotiating from the outstart. We are now having some sort of rhetoric that is aggressive, that has strength to it, is a strong sort of rhetoric to bring Iran to the table, saying if bad things from America are going to happen if you do not come to the table, agree to denuclearize, and assure that we're going to have a conversation that is going to be best not only for America but for the rest of the world. And that's what Mark Levin and others, neocons, Lindsey Graham, do not want us to come to table. Tom Tillis, that wants regime war and wants a regime change war in foreign policy, do not want it. They want us to bomb Iran. They want us to send our men and women in the military over there to fight on behalf of other countries. That's not what America wants. That's not what MAGA wants. We want Iran to come to the table, come to the White House, meet with President Trump, and meet with the National Security Council to ensure that the most efficient America First foreign policy is going to happen. And that is not through nuclear war. That is not through World War III. And that is not the neoconservative foreign policy that Mark Levin and others want. We want an America First foreign policy. And that's exactly what President Trump has decided to do today, and allowing Iran to have time to come to the negotiating table and come to an agreement that will be America First and be a safe foreign policy for America and the rest of the world.
Well, and Kenny, I think you just encapsulated it there perfectly, that President Trump understands the threat of a nuclear Iran. He has clearly spoken out about this for years, but he also understands the threat of getting America into yet another prolonged war that these neocons, who can't even tell you the population of Iran or what the ethnic groups are, would do for Americans, American troops or others that got in. Plus, of course, this serious question about whether or not a strike on Iran would be the opening salvo into a greater war. I mean, certainly we can sit there all day long and talking heads can say, oh, it's just a strike on one facility. But, well, the enemy always gets a vote. And so the enemy could perhaps decide that they don't want to see it like that. And they would look at it as a strike into a wider war. So President Trump here pumping the brakes in a really big way, an absolutely stunning way for, I think, a lot of people, certainly in the D.C. Beltway, because we have a minute till the break. Washington, D.C. is a one industry town, and that industry is government. And a huge portion of the people who work here in this town are funded through war, are funded through the military industrial complex. There's so many, and I'm not just talking DOD, I mean the contractors and all the money that gets spread around Washington. So much of this comes through that business of war. War is a racket. And along comes President Trump and says, well, wait a minute. I want to do less of that. I don't know if these things are always good for the American people. I mean, that's like going into Los Angeles or going directly into Hollywood and saying you don't want to do movies anymore. That's why the town of D.C. and the Beltway hates Trump so much and hates MAGA so much. MAGA wants to be secure. MAGA has no problem using the military on the borders and on the cartels because that's a direct threat to America. What MAGA has an issue with is getting dragged into another sand trap the same way we did twice under George Bush and his successors. Right back, Real America's Voice.
Terrence Bates here with your Real America's Voice news break. President Trump set to travel to The Hague in the Netherlands next week for a NATO summit. He'll be meeting with fellow heads of state and government officials from other NATO countries. Defense spending will likely be among the critical issues the president will push NATO countries on. The ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine and now the situation between Israel and Iran will likely also be part of daily conversations during the two-day meeting. As for Iran, President Trump says he'll make a decision on the way forward in the conflict in the next 2 weeks. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt also sharing this message from the Commander-in-Chief just moments ago from the White House.
Now, regarding the ongoing situation in Iran, I know there has been a lot of speculation amongst all of you in the media regarding the president's decision-making and whether or not the United States will be directly involved. In light of that news, I have a message directly from the president, and I quote, "Based on the fact that there's a substantial chance of negotiations that may or may not take place with Iran in the near future, I will make my decision whether or not to go within the next 2 weeks." That's a quote directly from the president for all of you.
You heard it for yourself there. And in other headlines, the Federal Reserve decides not to raise interest rates. The central bank is forecasting higher inflation despite admitting that the unemployment rate remains low and labor market conditions are solid. However, the Fed is sticking to its expectation of 2 rate cuts by the end of this year. President Trump continuing to criticize Fed Chairman Jerome Powell, though, for not cutting rates right now. By the way, just this morning, the Swiss National Bank cut its key interest rate by a 1/4 percentage point. Switzerland's central bank argues that inflationary pressures have eased in that country. The United States, specifically Jerome Powell, arguing that inflation is still a concern, and that's why interest rates here aren't being cut at this particular point. That's a quick check of your headlines. As always, we appreciate having you along for the ride. Now, let's get you back to Jack Posobiec and Human Events Daily.
Today, they talk about influencers. These are influencers, and they're friends of mine. Jack Posobiec. Where's Jack? Jack, he's done a great job.
All right, Jack Posobiec, here we are back live, Human Events Daily, here in Washington, D.C. on Real America's Voice. And gosh, I love looking at those giant American flags. Don't they look so good? It's a little bit of a nicer day here in Washington. Yesterday was a bit rough in terms of the weather, but man, do they look good. It just looks right. I'm just saying, it just looks right. Kenny Cody, another thing that looks right is President Trump. President Trump, yet again, looking all of this down the barrel of a gun, potentially a nuclear barrel, and saying, you know what? I've got strength on my side. I'm going to take the meeting. Potentially, he's now signaled that the United States will continue negotiations. We know that the NATO meeting is coming up next week. We know that the EU foreign ministers are going to be meeting with Iranian diplomats and potentially their foreign minister in Geneva next week. Witkoff, of course, also speaking directly with President Trump's special envoy, meeting directly with and speaking directly with the foreign minister of Iran. And the White House also saying that Iran could come to Washington, D.C. I mean, Kenny, could you imagine any other president actually sitting down and meeting with Iranian officials at the White House?
Absolutely not. Trump has his finger on the button, and most presidents would just press it and say, this is the decision that we're making. We're going to bomb Iran. We're going to end all negotiations. We're not even going to have people come to the table. But President Trump is different. He knows the threat and the amount of firepower that the United States military has at its access. We could help Iran out. We could bomb. We could make Iran all glass if we wanted to. But that's not what President Trump wants to do. He knows the risk that there is in embassies on American bases. He knows that if we struck right now, we would be stuck in Iran for a very long time. Our men and women would be put in danger, in harm's way by the Iranian military and by China, by so many countries that back Iran. We know this. We know that it's exactly what would happen. President Trump knows that's what would happen. So he has his finger on the button to bring people to the table. And that's exactly what his foreign policy has been over the last 10 years, is to use that strength negotiating power, know that the cards are are in our favor. Know that we have the power. Iran doesn't. They know that we're not a third world country. Iran is a third world country. If we look at these negotiations, we know that we have the power. We know that we control the conversation. It is no longer that any other country in the world controls the narrative, controls the conversation, where the power should go, what strikes should there be, who should be negotiating, who should come to the table. The United States has that. America has that. And that's what President Trump's main focus is. I trust that regardless of what happens over the next 2 weeks, that President Trump is going to make the right move. And this shows that hesitation, knowing that if we can negotiate our way into bringing Iran to the table and denuclearizing Iran, that we need to take that opportunity instead of just going into firepower, starting another forever war. And that's exactly what Trump is going to do. He is going to ensure that we stay away from those things and keep our men and women in the military out of the way and future generations from being in a forever war.
Now, Kenny, by the way, you've got this incredible article up about how the No Kings protests seem to have just kind of completely dissipated from the news cycle. It's up at humanevents.com. Walk us through a little bit of that.
Yeah, I mean, there is this. I've already seen the comments on this article. I've already seen the mainstream media try to argue that the No Kings protests were some of the most successful protests of American president history. But let's look at the cities that actually had participation. If you look at Chicago, Los Angeles, Sacramento, New York City, you're looking at all these cities that are inherently liberal and inherently leftist in terms of their population, that of course are going to be anti-Trump because they've always been against Trump. They've always been against any Republican, any conservative, let alone the most significant impactful conservative of the last 150 years of our country. Of course, you're going to see these outpours and these participations. But where it really mattered and where this dissipated was we're in these rural districts, in these swing districts, in states like Pennsylvania, Ohio, Florida, and Arizona. You didn't see this massing or this huge participation in these protests from cities and states that it actually mattered. Yeah, I'm sure that these violent fires that they're throwing out there, these businesses that are getting broke into, it's a continuation of the LA riots, only it has President Trump's face on them. But this was already happening in these liberal leftist cities and protesting mass deportations. This was already happening. This is exactly what the American people think of the Democratic Party. They want to burn down our streets the same way they did in 2020 in BLM. There is this argument that this is some nuanced, unique protest, and it's not. It's the same continuation of leftism the last 10 years.
Kenny Cody going to be making a special trip to Washington, D.C. He's got some secret meetings. They're so top secret, Kenny won't even tell me what they are, but I hope to get to see you next week there, Kenny.
Appreciate you guys. God bless you, brother. Look forward to seeing you.
All right, take care. Make sure you follow him, Kenny Cody, humanevents.com. We'll be right back. Real America's Voice.
Welcome back to this Real America's Voice news break. I'm Terrence Bates. President Trump is set to travel to The Hague in the Netherlands next week for a NATO summit. He'll be meeting with fellow heads of state and government officials from other NATO countries. Defense spending will likely be among the critical issues the president will push during that meeting. But the ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine and now the situation between Israel and Iran likely will also be part of the daily conversations during that two-day summit. As for Iran, President Trump says he'll make a decision on the way forward in that conflict in the next 2 weeks. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt also sharing this message from the White House just moments ago.
In 2011, President Trump said America's primary goal with Iran must be to destroy its nuclear ambitions. We cannot allow this radical regime to acquire a nuclear weapon that they will either use or hand off to terrorists. In 2015, the president said the problem is that Iran poses an existential threat to Israel, our Middle Eastern allies, and the United States. And of course, the president has repeated that in his first term as president and his second term as president as well. That's why he was adamantly opposed to the disastrous Iranian nuclear agreement that was implemented by President Obama, and it's why he has given great latitude and given a lot of effort to achieving a diplomatic solution.
And diplomacy rules the day with the president as he's continuing to work on a deal with Iran. In the meantime, Vice President J.D. Vance back up and running on social media app Blue Sky after his very first post on that platform got him suspended. So what could the vice president have said to get him booted, you ask? Well, it was a simple post saying, "Hello, Blue Sky. I've been told this app has become the place to go for common sense political discussion and analysis, so I'm thrilled to be here to engage with all of you." Well, the suspension lasted about 20 minutes, with Blue Sky releasing a statement saying, in part, Vice President Vance's account was briefly flagged by our automated systems that try to detect impersonation attempts which have targeted public figures like him in the past. The account was quickly restored and verified so people can easily confirm its authenticity. That's a quick check of your headlines.
And Jack, where's Jack? Where's Jack? Where is he? Jack, I want to see you. Great job, Jack. Thank you. What a job you do. You know, we have an incredible thing. We're always talking about the fake news and the bad, but we have guys, and these are the guys who should be getting Pulitzers.
All right, Jack Posobiec, here we are back live, Human Events Daily. Beautiful live shot of the White House there. You can see those enormous American flags. Gosh, they look so good. I love seeing them there. I love seeing them flapping in the breeze right outside the White House, where we know President Trump is hard at work right now. We're told that he was having another National Security Council meeting and, of course, signaling that he wants to continue the negotiation process with Iran rather than jump for this immediate strike that so many people have been calling for, and certainly that people on cable news, both on the left and right, seem to be uniting behind this immediate strike on the Islamic Republic of Iran. I want to bring in now Evita Duffy. She's the host of the early edition of the Bongino Report. She joins us now. Evita, how are you?
Thanks for having me, Jack.
Thank you. So, Evita, I've got to get your reaction, and initially, I'd like to hear your immediate reaction to President Trump's announcement of this 2 weeks of a negotiation period that he would like to hold, but also sort of get your sense on where Gen Z is more broadly on all of this.
Well, I think, Jack, it's obvious that the president is thinking about the future of this country, of what is best for America right now. We have an open border. We have people dying of fentanyl on our streets. We have veterans homeless on the streets. I mean, we are facing really an invasion. This is what President Trump would like to do, to address the invasion at our border. And he's saying, I think we want to avoid war with Iran at all costs. That's what MAGA has always been. It has been anti-war, especially anti-forever wars. And so if there is a path for peace, President Trump is going to seek out that path. That is going to be the priority. It always has been for this president. And I think this is why he was elected in the first place. Now, what does Gen Z think about all this? I'll tell you what, Jack, Gen Z is not interested in a war with Iran at all. But I think it makes a lot of sense. this because this is a generation that grew up with forever wars in the Middle East. I was born in 1999. My entire childhood, we were engaged in conflict in Iraq and Afghanistan. And so I think this is a generation that looks at what's happened to our country, sees all of the problems here at home, and wants to avoid another foreign conflict at all costs. And I feel that this is actually where President Trump has always been, and the MAGA movement has always been.
So the idea is, I think that Gen Z is when they say America first, what they're really talking about is this idea that, look, and I sympathize too, because you see people and I think about it, it's like, oh my gosh, earliest memories are 9/11. And then suddenly America has this huge rush to war in a country that wasn't involved in 9/11. So many people die. So many people are killed. So many wounded warriors coming back, their faces scarred, their limbs blown off, fathers and mothers who are never coming home to their children. And in fact, so many children who are never coming home to their mothers and fathers. Then you've got the global financial crisis. You've got everything with China. You've got COVID on top of that, all the rest. And suddenly it's like, wait a minute, when is my government going to do something for me? Now, and it's sort of like, as a, quote unquote Gen Y or whatever, it's like, I can remember a time when the institutions sort of made sense and the system sort of worked. And I can remember the collapse. I saw the collapse. I lived through it. But Gen Z doesn't really have that memory, do they?
No, not at all, Jack. And I think it's millennials that are the first generation to inherit an economic future worse off than their parents. Certainly Gen Z has that as well. We look out into the future and you're never going to own a home. If you do, we'll own one maybe in our 50s or our 60s. Rent is skyrocketing. It's not keeping up with wages. You have massive amounts of student debt that people are taking on. There's an invasion at our border, and this means that the value of labor has dramatically gone down in this country over the years. I mean, there are so many problems facing this next generation, and we have been lied to, you're right, by our institutions over and over again, by the media, by our academic institutions, by our own government. And so this is actually a bipartisan issue, I think. I think left and right, young people in this country do not have faith in the system. And if we can't get our own house in order, if we look out into the future and say, what do we have to look forward to? How can we think about making some place on the other side of the world better? I think this is a generation that says, let's focus on what's here at home. Let's make our lives better, the American people's lives better. And then we can worry about what's happening across the country, overseas. I mean, this is about priorities. This is actually biblical, right? Take the log out of, your own eye before the splinter out of your neighbors. And that is exactly where this generation's at.
Well, no, I think that's exactly right. And, when it comes to Gen Z, then when they hear President Trump has stood up to the war lobby that was calling for these immediate strikes and was saying that we need to go in right now, rush, get into another conflict, don't negotiate, and I'm just going to say it. And Media wrote me up for saying this on Twitter last night. Mark Levin was demanding that the president of the United States not take any more meetings. He said, no more meetings, Mr. President. You're not allowed to have them. And he's got that very shrill voice. And it's interesting because, it's like, Mark, I'm from like 15 minutes from where you're from. Like, we don't, like you don't have to do that. Just, have some hot tea or something. I don't know. And you're not the president. Donald Trump is the president. Do you think then that Gen Z is going to look favorably on President Trump's decision to pump the brakes and say, hey, let's explore all the options here?
Well, Jack, absolutely. And it's not just right-wing Gen Z, although that's certainly true if you look at the new right, the young energy of this party, but it's also people on the political left, young people on the political left that are looking at the situation abroad and saying, we just don't want any part of this. And there's an opportunity, I think, a golden ticket opportunity for Trump to create, and I think he already has, but to truly, really cultivate it in the face of this crisis, to say, we are a new populist movement that is bringing in people who might might not necessarily be traditional neocon Republicans, might not have even been voting for Republicans in the past. And this is what he's been able to do, and this is what he has an opportunity to continue doing, bringing this coalition of people that is extremely unique, and especially among young people when they see the bravery. I think there was a soundbite where he said, I don't think we want a war with Iran, and it was circulating around left-wing TikTok. I mean, there are people who are watching him on the political left, especially among young people, saying this is an opportunity really for us to stand up for peace.
And that being said, President Trump also has signaled that, what else can be done with those 2 weeks? Hey, wait a minute. There's this bill that's out there. And I get that people have questions about the spending, and I certainly sympathize with that. But this goes to funding deportations. And we know that this administration, and Kayleigh McEnany was out last night talking about this, that's the number one priority for President Trump. And it has been his number one issue for the American people when they look at their list of priorities that are facing them. So, Evita, we're doing your Gen Z whisperer, analysis for us here on the program. But, how does Gen Z view the deportations? Obviously, there's a split, I would imagine, between left and right. But in terms of prioritizations, deporting the 20 to 50 million illegal aliens that are here, how does Gen Z view that?
Well, I think it's a good question, Jack, but I think there's still a political divide on this issue. But I think once you articulate to Gen Z that it's devaluing labor in this country to have massive legal and illegal immigration, they come around because they see that they don't have an economic future. I think what President Trump has been able to do since 2015 is he is very culturally savvy. He is somebody who, even though he's an older guy, is able to articulate the feelings of the people of this. He's able to have a pulse on the zeitgeist, and this is why what he said in on the debate stage about ending the forever wars was so radical, but also so resonant, because it was what everybody was feeling. And I think this is a president that cares about what young people think and want. And I think if he is able to create a deal, to make some peace in this critical time, he is going to be deeply respected by young people. And I think he is somebody who really cares about that more than any other president, I think, ever has cared about where young people are at. This is what this president has been able to do.
And you know what it is? It's the president, and I've seen it a million times, and I've heard it a million times. I've seen it myself on a few brief occasions. He really listens to everyone. It's a superpower that he has that so many people in Washington just don't do. They don't listen. They don't listen. They don't care. They are authoritarian. There's a huge, there's almost a philosophical conversation we could have. We don't have the time for it here, but there's a difference between being authoritarian and authoritative. So the left is authoritarian. Get your jab, or you're going to lose your job, or get kicked out of the military, or put your mask on. Remember, don't pull it down in between every bite. You got to pull that mask. That's authoritarian. Authoritative means you're going to make a decision, and when you make your decision's final. But you listen. You take feedback. You understand where people's feelings are, where their interests are, why they care about certain issues a certain way, why what matters to them matters high, matters low. And then he makes that decision based on listening to all sources and not just one or the other. And I really think that that's why so many people across age groups, and you see this with, I think the exception of super seniors was the only group in some of the last polling that was anti-Trump, that with every other age group, in the last polls that I saw, he was winning in every single one of them. And earlier today, some of the polls came out, and he's still riding very high at 50% or even over 50%. Last minute until the break, to you, Evita Duffy.
Well, I think diversity of thought is really important. It's definitely something that this president values, Jack. Something else I want to just add. Blessed are the peacemakers, and taking a second to step back and say, how can we get to peace? How can we get to a solution here? This is what we're called to do as Christians, to look at a situation and see with eyes unclouded by hate. It can be really emotional. And to have a president say, you know what, we're going to take 2 weeks. We're going to think about this. I'm going to weigh all the options. That's not only a rational thing that a leader does. It's what a Christian is called to do in a situation like that as a third party, to diffuse and to have the least amount of loss of life.
And this is something that I think a lot of people are going to say, you know what? Look, we want peace in the world. We don't want threats and nuclear threats, and we don't want rogue regimes and all of these things. But at the same time, the American people also want to know that our interests are the ones that come first, as they should. Jack Posobiec, right back. Human Events Daily.
What we are doing every single day is we are dedicating ourselves and our staff and our students and our activists for a full revival of America.
Get ready to launch into the future of freedom at the largest student event in the nation. SAS is back. Join thousands of fellow students ready to pioneer a bold new era for America at our Student Action Summit. and we're bringing in the biggest voices in the movement. Featuring Charlie Kirk, Tucker Carlson, Steve Bannon, Dr. Ben Carson, Congresswoman Anna Paulina Luna, Brandon Tatum, James O'Keefe, Benny Johnson, Jack Posobiec, and more. From July 11th through 13th in Tampa, Florida. Register now at SAS2025.com.
When I'm working long hours, I'm always listening to Human Events with Jack Posobiec.
All right, Jack Posobiec, here we are back. Human Events Daily, Real America's Voice, your source for the true inside scoop of what's going on in Washington, D.C. We're on with Evita Duffy, and just an incredible independent voice out there on Gen Z and really on conservatism as we move into the new age and the new Trump era. Evita, I've got to ask you about this, that one of the biggest things that I've noticed looking at this Iran conflict is the massive generational split that you do seem to see on this issue. And one of the things that I noticed in the crosstabs of a poll that I was looking at the other day was it also showed a split in terms of where people get their news from. Do you think that that's something that's driving a lot of the difference of opinion on this issue?
Well, I think that's definitely something that's happening, Jack. I mean, if you look at what the mainstream media is, I mean, you're in alt media, it's a monolith. I mean, there's really not a lot of diversity of thought that's happening. The internet has democratized information, and suddenly people who don't have the backing of a major media corporation are able to garner a massive following and create an audience of people who trust them as an individual, as a voice. And this is where Gen Z is getting their news, and it's radically different from where the boomer generation are getting their news. And I'll say, Jack, I think there's a lot of animosity between the generations. A lot of young people will say, oh, those boomers, or they'll call older women Karens, and a lot of older people get offended by that. I tend to view boomers, frankly, as victims of a system. I don't necessarily blame them, as a lot of young people do. I think the reason that they have these opinions about foreign wars or their trust in media that is not very trustworthy is it's been a long time, generations, decades of psyoping that I think is deeply unfair for the boomer generation. And this newer generation that's waking up and realizing this isn't the America of my parents and grandparents. And it's going to take some time, I think, for a lot of them to come over. But I think President Trump actually in 2016 articulating things like, hey, there were no weapons of mass destruction has been an amazing place to start.
Well, you know, and I had Raheem Kassam on here the other day, and we had a conversation about that, where we were speaking sort of to Gen Z as, you know, a couple of Gen Y guys saying, look, we remember what it was like in those early days. I was 17 going on 18 that year, and Raheem was, I think, 16 going on 17, and something like that. And I just remember this war fervor of, you know, we've got to stop Saddam. He's got the WMDs. It's good. We're going to be greeted as liberators. He's so evil. He's so bad. And we look at so much that was lost. We look at so much in terms of the finances, the money, the blood, the treasure, the people that never came back, the people that were broken, and our politics that was completely devastated in this country because there was this horrific event like 9/11 that the neocons came in and then essentially emotionally manipulated using emotional blackmail to win public opinion to their side. And I'm not saying that's what's going on now, but I am saying that a lot of us view the current world through that lens.
This is maybe I shouldn't share the story, but I'm going to share it with you guys anyways. I was in DC a few days ago, and I was talking to somebody in the Trump admin who's pretty high up, and my husband made a joke, and he said, "I don't want to spend my summer in Tehran." It was a joke, and this individual said, "Well, don't you want to die for your country?" And I think that there's a lot of older individuals even many in the Trump admin who think that this generation just isn't patriotic and they don't love America. And that's why they don't want to go overseas and fight for this country. And really what it is a disconnect between what's happened in the last few decades and what the perception is among older people, because there was really nothing accomplished in the Middle Eastern wars that we've had over the last few years. We left our equipment there. Numerous people died on both sides. It was horrific. Christian communities decimated. Not a lot of people know that. Younger Americans are awake to this, and it's not that they're unpatriotic. If there was a real imminent threat coming to this country, I know that the young boys in America who are in their early 20s, 18, 19, they would go and fight. These are patriotic men. Nothing's
and that's how they look at the cartels. That's exactly how they look at the cartels and the illegals. Evita, we are just out of time. I'd love to get into that for a much longer conversation. Where can people go to follow you? Where are you posting all of these white hot takes?
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me, Jack. You can go to EvitaDuffy_1 on Instagram and on X.
Make sure you're going and following her, Evita Duffy, an incredible voice. My favorite anti-communist, by the way. Folks, I just got to say it again. President Trump, at the end of all of this, will deserve the Nobel Peace Prize. For blessed are the peacemakers. Ladies and gentlemen, as always, you have my permission to play a short.
They tried to shut them up.
There's no